What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Today I'm going to tell you a story of one of the biggest and most impactful events in Yu-Gi-Oh history. An event that in theory was actually inevitable, but was still a huge shock to the player base and to all competitive duelists nonetheless. Today I proudly present the story of Yu-Gi-Oh's first true forbidden and limited ban list. Just so I have complete clarification, the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game has had an official limited list dating all the way back to July 1999 in the OCG, where get this, Trap Hole was actually limited to one, and there were only 3 cards on the entire list. Of course, we got our first official list in the TCG in May 2002, but the concept of actually banning or making a card completely forbidden for officially sanctioned tournament play did not exist until over 5 years after the first Yu-Gi-Oh booster pack was released in Japan. For the TCG equivalent, that means that our first booster set, Legends of Blue Eyes White Dragon, all the way until the 11th set, Ancient Sanctuary. Every single card, every deck, every single strategy that you can think of released was always 100% legal. This includes powerful monsters that could virtually erase an entire duel like Chaos Emperor Dragon and Fiber Jar, lockdown floodgates that can completely take away your opponent's access to an entire mechanic like Imperial Order, even cards that were known to habitually cause draws like Ring of Destruction, and of course this included the dreaded first turn kills like the Magical Scientist FTK. If Konami printed it, you could use it, but on one fateful day, everything that we knew changed forever. Before we jump into the actual list itself and the impact it had, let's first have a crash course refresher on the game during the Duel Monsters era from a TCG perspective. In 2002, the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG, which is the European, North and South American part of the game, was still in its genesis. Strategies were incredibly elementary. While we did have some powerful traps and even more powerful spell cards, monsters were incredibly underwhelming. Konami, of course, recognized that spell and traps were quite ahead of monsters, and that's precisely why there was a disproportionate amount of spell and trap cards, limited to one for tournament play, while very few monsters actually appeared on the list, mainly just Exodia pieces. However, in 2003, the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG released a whopping 6 booster sets in the year. While archetypes were not really a solidified concept yet, Konami started releasing some incredibly powerful singular monsters like Jinzo, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and Tribe Infecting Virus, just to name a few, because some of those singular monsters were so absurdly powerful, using them to their fullest potential could even make them win conditions, as seen with the release of Yatagarasu and Legacy of Darkness and the infamous Yata Lock, or the aforementioned Magical Scientist FTK with the release of Magician's Force. The game as a whole advanced to the point where many of Yu-Gi-Oh's best competitive decks were made up of a pool of the best and most powerful cards, but the ratios were basically player preference. In fact, this is the reason that the term staple exists in Yu-Gi-Oh, often used to describe a card that is good in nearly any deck. Cards like Sangan and Pot of Greed during this time were used in practically any deck or strategy. Beatdown, Control, Burn, didn't matter, you were probably running these cards. By the time 2004 rolled around, the release of Invasion of Chaos had metaphorically opened the gates of hell and was arguably Yu-Gi-Oh's most powerful set to date, giving us the Chaos Envoys, who instantly shot up to the top of the game's most powerful cards list. While Yu-Gi-Oh had potent cards before, this was a time where games were consistently ending by turn 3. To put it bluntly, there were too many powerful cards released in such a short amount of time. Nearly every opening hand could comprise of 2 to 3 cards that, if used right, could easily win you the duel. And even more important, it was just a bad look for the game. Konami was banking heavily on the success of their upcoming Shonen Jump Championship series, which was going to start in December. Because of all the degeneracy competitive Yu-Gi-Oh was seeing on small scale locals and the echoing complaints from the players about many of the cards, even at limited to one status, it was definitely in Konami's best interest to clean up this mess, lest their Shonen Jump series end up being a colossal failure. And to everybody's absolute surprise, that's exactly what they did. And a move that, to call shocking, would be seriously putting it lightly. Konami updated the official limited list to go into effect August 25th, 2004. To everybody's disbelief, this new list had absolutely no new limited or semi-limited cards at all, but what it did have was 13 colossal changes. The limited list that we had come to know for over 2 years in the TCG was now the forbidden and limited list that we all know in the game today. Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, Yatagarasu, Dark Hole, Regeki, Graceful Charity, United We Stand, Monster Reborn, Harpy's Feather Duster, Delinquent Duo, Imperial Order, and Mirror Force were all newly forbidden. Just like that, some of the most powerful and even iconic cards from the Yu-Gi-Oh anime were all gone in one fell swoop. This concept was completely new for players in the OCG's Asian regions as well as us in the TCG, and to have over a dozen cards hit at once, it was truly unbelievable that Konami would do something on a scale this large out of the blue. While it was salvation from some of Yu-Gi-Oh's most broken cards, many were puzzled by the banning of others. Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, without a doubt the single most powerful card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh at the time, the power to essentially erase an entire duel, nuke both players' whole field and all the cards in both players' hands, while at the same time being one of the easiest boss monsters in the game to summon. What's more ridiculous is this guy bolstered a huge 3000 attack body with the ability to do burn damage as well. If Chaos Emperor Dragon wasn't bad enough by itself, the fact that it made the Yada lock even more consistent was. This was arguably the most hated card in the game. Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. These two, in my personal opinion, were collateral damage of Chaos Emperor and Yatagarasu, both powerful searches that could get you all manner of strong monsters. They were always viewed as some of the safest monsters in the game to put on the field, as if they were destroyed by any means and sent to the graveyard, they would allow you to replace them by giving you a search of an even stronger monster. This was especially true of Witch of the Black Forest, as she could grant you instant access to high attack monsters that were ideal for counterattacks like Tribe Infecting Virus, Reflect Bounder, and Breaker the Magical Warrior, as well as high powered difficult to kill boss monsters like Vampire Lord and Jinzo. Yatagarasu, the first card in Yu-Gi-Oh to have a play so truly despicable that nearly every player who fell victim to it would instantly concede the duel. Yata may not appear powerful in terms of raw strength, but it held an effect so powerful that over 15 years after its release, and Konami has only printed about 3 or 4 monsters since that even have effects that rival his. In fact, the reason Konami hardly ever makes cards at all that skips the opponent's draw phase is for fear of creating another infamous Yada lock. Some would say that this was the most notorious card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh at the time. Dark Hole and Regeki. Most players were completely fine with Regeki getting banned. After all, it was a one-sided board wipe that destroyed all of your opponent's monsters with the simple activation of a spell card that had no cost attached. However, most saw Dark Hole as a much more fair alternative. Dark Hole destroyed your monsters as well, meaning that its skillful timing was critical to get the most out of the card, or in many situations you might simply have to cut your losses and use it anyways, knowing you might end up losing monsters in the process as well. Graceful Charity, still to this day one of the most powerful draw cards of all time. Speed may kill on the road, but in Yu-Gi-Oh it provides the power to get to your combo pieces and best cards, and nothing lets you instantly dig deeper into your deck for those cards than Graceful Charity. This was also used at a time when Sinister Serpent was played in almost everything, so it was always a card that was used in conjunction with Graceful as the discard, as you would just add it back to your hand during your next turn for free. United We Stand. Most were straight up confused and baffled by this card being banned. United We Stand was an equipped spell that pretty much was the embodiment of power in numbers. The more monsters you had on your side of the field, the stronger your monster would grow. In theory, there was no need for the banning of this card, because if you had that many monsters on the field to begin with, you should have already been in a commanding position. In all honesty, there was only one major way to exploit United We Stand, and that was Scapegoat, which would give you 4 tokens on the field instantly. Monster Reborn. This was a classic anime card that was seemingly used by every major character on the show. It was seen as a pretty sacky card by duelists. After all, it did allow you to summon a monster back from either player's graveyard, not just your own. The fact that 2 suitable replacements in Call of the Haunted and Premature Burial were both released in the 4th set, Pharaoh's Servant, meant that while most duelists would admittedly miss the card, they understood why it was getting banned. Harpy's Feather Duster. This was the Regeki for spells and traps. One simple activation and poof, all your opponent's back row was gone. Delinquent Duo. One of the 3 hand disruptors released in the set Magic Ruler. This was easily the best of the the bunch. For the small cost of 1,000 life points, you could rip your opponent's opening hand to shreds by forcing them to discard 2 cards. One of them was picked randomly by you, and the other they had to choose themselves. It was the ultimate way of punishing players who went second and very unfair. Imperial Order, the ability to lock your opponent out of their spell cards, whether they wanted to activate them from the hand or field, or even use the continuous spell cards they already had on the field. With Imperial Order out, you could shut down spells for their entire turn and simply get rid of the card during your turn, letting you use all the spells you liked. If you knew it was hurting your opponent too much to get rid of, you could simply pay the low cost of 700 life points to keep it as long as you wanted. Lastly, Mirror Force, one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most iconic traps of all time. This is one that absolutely enraged the players, as not only was Mirror Force a fan favorite because it was used by the king of games himself on the anime, but Mirror Force was always looked at as one of the most skillful cards in the game. Players would often try to play around the card by switching monsters to defense mode, and sometimes very smart players would even hold their Mirror Force and take direct attacks to give their opponents a false sense of security so they could bait them into a huge counterplay. For better or worse, our new Forbidden and Limited list shook up the game and its players, letting them know that Konami was willing to permanently address monsters and strategies like the Yada Lock if they ever got out of hand. But at the same time, with some arguably bad and confusing hits, many realized that there were definitely going to be some growing pains with this new process. Some also noted the timing of the first ever Forbidden list, as it went into effect just a week before the highly anticipated Battle City Amsterdam tournament, which had almost 1,200 registered duelists and was considered a raving success. So there you guys have it, the story of Yu-Gi-Oh's first true Forbidden and Limited list. I actually remember playing the game back then as a teenager, and this was like it was so shocking, and it was a foreign concept. And what I really liked about it was it showed us, the players, that like no card was above the game, no card was bigger than the game. As something like Chaos Emperor Dragon, it had only been out like a few months, and then Konami just like took it out the game immediately, saying, you know, this thing is too powerful, we got to get rid of this. And I don't know, it was really shocking. So you guys let me know what you thought of this story. If you guys like these videos and you find them informative, please give the video a thumbs up or subscribe. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already. Turn on that notification bell for daily videos.